When you do anything in life, whether it's putting together a toy chest, or it's cleaning a car, or it's making something for dinner, there's always some instruction that you either have to read or that you have to learn. Nobody's just born knowing it, right? You have to, read instructions online, or somebody has to teach you the instructions. There's always some type of template. There's always some instructions on how to do something. Well, that's pretty much what a Jenkins file is. So a Jenkins file is a text file that contains definitions. And those definitions, when I say definitions, think template, think instructions. So it tells a pipeline what it should be doing and what services and plugins it should be interacting with. So for example, let's say you're deploying some code to, I don't know, Azure or AWS or even on-prem. Well, there's going to be some plugins that are there, of course, and we've went through plugins in the plugin section and we understand all of that. And the Jenkins file would contain those plugins, or at least pointers to those plugins, so the Jenkins file knows, hey, I need to be able to use that plugin or that service or that credential or something along those lines. So as you can see here, we actually have a little screenshot of a Jenkins file and what it actually is. And we're going to go over what each of these mean, but what I want you to keep in mind is, this is kind of what it looks like. You got a keyword, and then right underneath that keyword, you got a couple brackets. And then within those brackets, you tab over, either one tab or 4 spaces, and then you start to define what things look like. So this is in short, what a Jenkins file actually looks like as you're writing it and as you see it. So let's go over each of the pieces that we saw, in that screenshot of a Jenkins file. So first, you have your pipeline, and you're always defining some pipeline. It could be just a CI pipeline, it could be just a CD pipeline, it could be a CI/CD pipeline. But really what that pipeline is it's the task that you're trying to accomplish. So let's say, I don't know, you're trying to build some code. Or maybe you just want to build and test some code. Or maybe you want to build, test, and turn it into an artifact. Or maybe you want to go through the entire pipeline. So you want to build the code, you want to run your automated tests, you want to run your linters, and you want to deploy it to the specific location. Maybe that's on-prem, maybe that's in the cloud, maybe that's a container. Point is, the pipeline is the task that you are trying to accomplish. The node is the build agent. So in the next section coming up, we will be going over build agents and what they are, why we use them, etc. But really what I want you to think of when you hear build agent right now is the place that runs your pipeline. Next, you set up your stages. So you have a dev stage, you have a staging stage, or sometimes people call it UAT, and then you could have a prod stage, you could have a QA stage, a bunch of different stages, whatever you call them, whatever your organization calls them. Point being, you set up those stages of work inside of your pipeline. And then finally, you have steps. So the steps are the work that's being done in the pipeline. So for example, you might have a step to deploy code to Azure or to AWS. It all depends on what you want to be doing, but the point is that you have those steps available. And again, those steps could even be just for your CI pipeline. So for example, maybe you have just a CI pipeline and you have just steps in there to test the code and then to build the code. That's perfectly fine as well. Now, a quick note here on multi-stage pipelines. So if you're not familiar with multi-stage pipelines, it's one Jenkins file, multiple stages. So again, those stages could be dev, staging, and prod. Now you could have a Jenkins file that just does one of these stages. So for example, you might have a Jenkins file that just deploys to dev, or just deploys to staging, or just deploys to prod. Or you could have a multi-stage pipeline, which takes dev, staging, and prod and puts them into one Jenkins file, and then you deploy to all of those environments. Now the cool thing about multi-stage pipelines is, let's say for example, you have dev, staging, prod, and you try to deploy to dev, which is the first stage, and it fails. Well, guess what? If it fails, you're not going to move forward onto the new stage. Instead, it's going to fail, and then you're going to go back and you're going to fix, and then you're going to try to deploy again. And then once it passes dev, then it'll go to staging. And once it passes staging, then it'll go to prod. So first things first, if you want to create a Jenkins file, at least in VS Code, it's pretty straightforward. Just create a new file and literally just type Jenkins file. And as you can see, VS Code knows that this is a Jenkins file, which is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 separate Jenkins files. Now, we will not be deploying them right now. I just want to show you the structure and the overall basics. And then in the next few videos, we're going to actually look at deploying these Jenkins files. So first things first, I'm going to click on the Jenkins file test. I'm going to open up this Jenkins file. Now, this is a very straightforward Hello World Jenkins file. As we can see, we're first set up with our pipeline structure. And our pipeline structure has an opening bracket and it has a closing bracket. And inside of that opening and closing bracket, like for example, if I just take this out really quick, we can see that I'm specifying the agent. And the agent, again, we're going to talk about build agents in the next section, but this could be anything, any type of system that's running Java. I'm saying any here at this point. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to run the current Jenkins server as the build agent. Next, we have our stages that are set up. Now, our stage, we could have any type of stage that we want. Dev, UAT, prod, we can name it whatever we want. If we want to be a little bit more flush with our names here, we can go ahead and we can name this dev. And then the dev stage is going to deploy some steps. Now, the steps are inside of these brackets here. And what this step is doing, it's very straightforward. It's running an echo, which just means it's just gonna, say something back to us, say something to the terminal. That's gonna say hello world. And just like that, you could have your first pipeline set up very, very straightforward. Next, let's break into something a little bit more complicated here. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna close out of this Jenkins file. And then I'm gonna open up Go App One Stage, this directory here. And then I'm gonna click on this Jenkins file. Now, notice it's pretty much set up the same. We have our pipeline structure. We have our agent that we're calling upon. We have our stages. And then we have our step. Now, here's the thing that's actually happening. We're pulling code from GitHub now. So now what this is doing is, this is taking code from GitHub and it's building it for us inside of this pipeline. It's taking this code, it's pulling it from GitHub, and now we'll have that code readily available to start working on to be able to do things like run tests, for example. And then finally, if we just look into one more thing here, we looked at one stage. Let's look at multi-stage. Remember, we talked about multi-stage a little bit already. So as you can see, again, same thing. We have our pipeline structure set up. We're designing this to say use any agent. And then we have 2 stages. Now, this is where things are a little bit different. Inside of our stages block, we have 2 stage keywords. And then within those 2 stage keywords, we have 2 different stages. We have one called dev on line 5, and then we have one called UAT on line 12. Now, within each of those stages, within the dev stage and then within the UAT stage, we have steps. And both of these steps are doing the same thing. This isn't meant to be, a crazy hardcore advanced example here. This is really just to show how a multi-stage pipeline would work. And realistically, this actually does make sense because remember, when you're running multi-stage pipelines, you're not necessarily looking to do different things at each stage. You're really looking to do practically the same thing. You want to be able to build the code and you want to be able to test the code and push that code out and all of that good stuff. So if you're looking to set up multi-stage pipelines, this is the way that it would look. You would have inside of your stages bracket, you would have 2 or 3 or however many stage keywords. Within those stage keywords, you would have what stage, like dev or UAT, and then within there, you would have your steps. Now remember, just going back one more time, if you want one stage, this is what it looks like. Again, you have your stages bracket, you have your stage keyword, but you're just setting up one stage. So with that, now let's head over to the Jenkins portal and we can actually start building out some code. Before we build out our pipeline, like our actual one that's going to go ahead and push out our Go app and build it and all that good stuff, I do want to just show you how to set up a sample pipeline. I think that this definitely helps if you understand the process and just do, a sample versus going full-fledged 100% into a brand new pipeline that you're not really aware of. So what I want to do is, let's just go ahead and just set up what a pipeline typically looks like. So I'm in the dashboard here for Jenkins, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on New Item. Then I'm going to give this a name. I'm just going to call it Test 4. Then at this point, I have a few different options here, and let's kind of look at these and see what these actually mean. So first is a freestyle project, and this is a central feature of Jenkins. So it'll build the project, it'll combine any SCM, any build system, and it can even be used for something other than building software. Like, it doesn't have to be, an application. Now, a pipeline, which is probably what we'll be living in more or less, this is actually to create a pipeline. And we're going to see that in just a second. That's the one we're going to use. Then we have a multi-configuration project, which is great if you need a large number of Jenkins configurations. If you're setting up on like multiple environments, for example, this might even be good for like multi-stage pipelines. So let's say, you got a dev and a UAT stage, and maybe your dev stage, you're deploying it to some really cheap environment, and then your UAT stage, you're deploying it to more of like what it's going to look like in production. Next, you have a folder option, and this creates a container and then stores nested items inside of it. And it's great if you want to, group different projects together, filter those, all of that good stuff. Next, you have multi-branch pipeline, which we're going to see a little bit in this section as well. And what that does is it sets up a pipeline project for different repositories, so like different GitHub repositories and stuff like that. And then you have an organization folder, and that just creates a multi-branch project for all of your different subfolders that are available. So let's go ahead and choose pipeline. We'll click OK here. Okay, so now we have a bunch of different options. Let's just go ahead and go over these options. So all these tabs here, you can just see if I click on them, it just goes down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start at the top and we'll work our way down here. So first things first, we have a description, and we can give this a description here. For example, deploy our sample pipeline to test out Jenkins. And this could be really anything you want, but obviously you want the description to make sense to what you're doing. Okay, so now we have a few different options here. First, discard old builds. What that really means is it's not going to hold on to the builds for like a year, for example. There's really no reason for that unless you absolutely need it. I typically say to hold on to builds for like, a few weeks. I think that makes the most sense, but really other than that, you're never going to actually go and look at them unless you're troubleshooting something. But if you're troubleshooting something, you're looking at the builds anyways. Okay, and then we have another option to not allow concurrent builds, which means builds wouldn't be able to run at the same time. Now, this option doesn't make sense really, because depending on how large your environment is, you're probably going to have multiple teams using Jenkins. And because of that, you're definitely going to want to be able to build multiple times, or at the same time rather. The next option here is do not allow the pipeline to resume if the controller restarts. So if the controller, like the Jenkins server, restarts, this is saying don't resume the pipeline that was running while the restart occurred. Next, you have GitHub project here, which if you click on that, it allows you to put in the project URL. Pipeline speed, durability, override. Preserve stashes from completed builds. This project is parameterized, so it allows you to prompt users for one or more inputs. Think of it, like if you have to pass in a variable or something like that, this is a great way to do that. And then throttle builds. And what this does is this enforces a minimum time between builds based on the desired rate. So this is really good if you have like some slow systems, for example, or you're maybe working on scaling out at the moment, but you don't exactly like have that set up just yet. This would be good for that. It just kind of just slows down the workload. But the good thing is this is not the same as do not allow concurrent builds, the throttle builds, it'll allow concurrent builds so you can run as many as you want, but it'll just kind of slow it down a little bit. And again, this is good if you don't have the proper resources or the proper build agents to be able to run all of your builds whenever you feel like it. Okay, next, scrolling down, we have a few build triggers. So build after the other projects are built. This is kind of like throttling builds almost. Build periodically, which is like a cron job almost. So like, run my build every day at 2 a.m. for example. GitHub hook trigger for git SCM polling, which is just a GitHub push hook. Poll SCM, disable this project so if you don't want it to run at all. Quiet period. So what this means is the builds will be triggered, but it'll be added to a queue. And then trigger builds remotely. If you want to be able to trigger this, from a predefined URL from another location. Okay, then we have some advanced project options, which it's actually nothing in here by default really. It's just the display name. And then you have the actual pipeline. So for example, we can click on Hello World and it'll echo out Hello World. There's a GitHub plus Maven example here. And then there's a scripted pipeline example. This is actually pretty interesting. This build stage here, it's actually just running a whole bunch of bash code. So we'll just go ahead and we'll choose Hello World. Let's keep it real basic for our first one. And then use Groovy Sandbox. And if you're not familiar with Groovy, essentially what it is kind of like a scripting language, like a programming language almost. I think it actually defines itself as a programming language. So if we just go back here, we can see Groovy is a very powerful language which offers the ability to do practically anything Java can do. So kind of think about it like an extension of Java almost. But if you want to dive into Groovy a little bit more, definitely recommend this page right here. But really think about it like a Java extender almost for Jenkins. So now I'm going to click save. And then we are at the point where we can build our code if we want to. So what I can do is I can click build now. And then it says build scheduled. So as we can see here, the build ran successfully. It ran for about a second here. And we can see that the build was hello. That was the stage view. Now, let's say we want to, change something up a little bit here. If I go to configure, I'm now back at that location where I had all these options. And if I scroll down here, I can go to stage. And maybe we want to name this dev. Let's go ahead and let's save that. Let's do build now. And then as you can see, the build now ran again, but the stage is different. It's called dev. And then we can see here, oh, okay, our stage name has changed. Going off of where we just were, let's go ahead and go back to configure. And then I'm going to scroll down here. And what I want to do is I want to create a new stage. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this. And then I'm actually going to just paste that in here. And then what we'll do is we'll change this to UAT. So if you've guessed it by now, you are correct. Yes, we just created a multi-stage pipeline. Very straightforward, of course. The step is just echoing hello world, but I do just want to show this in action here. So if I click on save, and then I click on build now, we can see that we have now two stages here. We have one stage called dev, and then we have another stage called UAT. So when we build our multi-stage pipelines, we'll have the ability to see both right here. And we could also even see that, this was the third build that was run. But if we look at the second one, there was no UAT stage yet. However, the history of the one just dev running is still here, which is great. So we can see the history of even when it changed from single to multi-stage. All right, everybody, now that we know how to build a sample pipeline, we know all of the options available, let's actually dive in and build our code and test it for the first time. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to Manage Jenkins, and then I'm going to go to Manage Plugins. Now, I actually already have this plugin installed, but you will need to go ahead and you will need to install it yourself. So search for Go. And as you can see, I have this Go plugin here, but you can just go to Available, search for Go, and you should see a pop-up. You're just not seeing it here because I already have it installed. Now, once you have that, you're gonna have to restart Jenkins. So go ahead, restart Jenkins, and then come on back. All right, now once you're back, let's go ahead and start configuring our pipeline. So first things first, we're gonna type pipeline, and we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna use our brackets here. Now we're gonna use agent any, because we haven't set up our new build agent yet, which is again is perfectly fine. We will get there, I promise. And then we're gonna type tools, new opening closing bracket, and then we're going to type go for Golang, and then we'll do go -1.17. Now this is the latest in terms of when I'm recording this course right here, but it may be different for you. If you have a newer version, feel free to pop that one in. Okay, next what we're going to do is we're going to set up our environment. So we're going to type environment. Then we're going to type go 111 module equals on. Now, if you're not familiar with this, essentially what this means is you can install the latest version of some code base from, say, GitHub, for example. Okay, now next we're going to set up our stages. So let's go ahead and set up our stages here. We're going to type stage and we're going to type test in here because our first stage will be our tests. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is we're going to be running some unit tests on our code. So I'm going to type in steps, and then our first step is going to be to bring down the code very much like we did right here. So we're going to literally paste that same thing in there, and then we're going to run a shell command, and we're going to say go test //. What this means is it looks at the current directory and all of the subdirectories and runs every test that's available. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and copy this. We're going to head back over to Jenkins. And then now let's go to dashboard, new item. We'll call this Go3. We'll click on pipeline, click select here. And then we'll go ahead, we'll scroll down to pipeline and we'll pop our pipeline in. So again, what this is doing is it's using Go version 1.17. We're ensuring that the Go 111 module is on. We are setting up one stage for running our unit tests. So let's go ahead and let's save that. Let's click build now. And hopefully our code will build successfully. Okay, and as we can see, our code finished testing successfully. We can go ahead and we can take a look at the logs here. We can see our shell script, and we can see that there are no test files in these repositories, but in the controller repository here, we can see that there were tests and they all passed successfully. All right, everybody, now that we know the proper CI process and how to build our code using Jenkins, let's go ahead and learn the CI/CD process, as in let's go ahead and build our code, bring it down from GitHub, and create a Docker image. So you're going to notice here that our Jenkins file is pretty similar, has the same pipeline structure, using the same tools, the same environment variable. Even that development stage is still the same, where we're bringing down the Go code. Now really the biggest difference is on line 19 here, where we have a new stage called building our image. Now we're using this command from the Docker plugin, and I'm going to show you how to get that in just a second here. But what this is doing is it's going to be building a Docker image based on the code that we're bringing down on line 14. So let's go ahead and head over to our Jenkins instance, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to run this Jenkins file. All right, so I'm here at Jenkins, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to Manage Jenkins, and I'm going to go to Manage Plugins. Now if I go to Installed here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to search Docker. You're going to see a few that I have here: the Docker API plugin, the Docker Commons plugin, the Docker pipeline plugin, and then the Docker plugin. You're going to want to ensure that you have all of those installed, and you're going to want to ensure that you have Docker installed on your build server, which in this case is just the Jenkins server. So let's go ahead and go back to Jenkins. We're going to go to new item. We're going to give this a name. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click pipeline, click OK. Scroll down to my pipeline script. I'm going to paste in what I just showed everybody on VS Code. Notice here how it's the exact same. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click save. I'm going to click build now. And now our pipeline is going to officially kick off. When we have our few stages here, we can see our development stage and our building our image stage. And as you can see, it is already complete. It's probably going to be a little bit longer for you because you probably don't have the Go Docker image installed locally. And because I was testing this out already, I already have that. So if you notice that it's taking a little bit longer, that's perfectly normal. But if I click on our build here and I click on our console output, we can see that our code was brought down, and then we can see that our Docker image was successfully built. In the previous videos so far, you've seen how to test your code, how to pull it down from GitHub, how to build it, but we haven't exactly seen what it looks like to fully run the code. So what we're going to do right here is I'm actually going to take out line 22. And what we're going to do is we're going to have 3 stages. The first is going to be the test. Second is going to be build. Actually, this should be just build here. And then the third stage is run. So this test stage and the build stage, we've kind of already seen that where we built our code. Really where we want to focus is the run stage. So on line 24 here, notice how I have this directory. Now by default, all pipelines are under this workspace directory. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually calling upon the Go Web App sample build. And that build actually gets there by line 21 here. So without line 21, this build wouldn't exist. But because we're ultimately able to build our code and it all goes to the same place, we're then able to call upon our Go binary here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this. We're going to head over to the web browser. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my pipeline right here. And this pipeline is already created. So go ahead and just create this pipeline. Just call it Go Full Pipeline. If you call it something else, just keep in mind that you will have to change the name here on line 26. Now that's the name of my pipeline. So I was able to get this going. Next, I'm going to go to configure here, and this is just going to be a standard build pipeline. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run our pipeline now. So I'll go ahead and I'll build this. And we'll click on our 18 build here. As you can see, I've been playing around with this a little bit. Then I'm going to go to my console output. Now let's take a look at what's actually happening here. First, I'm running my tests, and as you can see, a lot of these directories don't have tests, but the controller directory does. And these tests ran, they were all good and passed successfully, which is great. Next, we're going to scroll down here. We see our build process occurring. Scroll down a little bit more, and we can see here that our pipeline did in fact finish successfully. So I'm going to go here and I'm just going to take my IP address of my Jenkins host, pop that in, and as we can see, our application is up and running over port 8000. Now, one thing that I do just want to point out, I'm not sure why this occurs, but it says Go Web App Sample not found. I actually even saw this on, for example, if I go to one of my previous builds that finished successfully. If I just go to the console output here and I scroll down, notice how it does say the same thing, but the application is in fact running successfully.